Rick Revel, Mr. History, brought to you in part by Dixie Gun Works in Union City, Tennessee. No matter where I travel in the South, I run across fields of cotton just like this one. And it's hard to imagine that during the mid-1800s, this cash crop was the catalyst for a major conflict known as the War between the States, or to some, as the American Civil War. Each man who fought during the war marched onto the battlefield with their own cause and convictions. Some fought for the Union, and others for states' rights. Some fought to free the slaves, and some fought to keep theirs. But believe it or not, less than 10% of the Southern population owned slaves. And if you dig deep enough, you'll find slave owners during that same time period in northern states also. We can all agree that slavery was an institution that should have never existed. But much to our dismay, it did. Oftentimes we get so emotionally invested that our opinions overshadow the truth. So, I ask of you, give me a few moments of your time, and I will tell you a story straight from the pages of American history. In our next segment, we'll be leaving the cotton fields of the South behind and heading to some salt mines north of the Mason-Dixon, a place that some historians don't want you to know about. But the truth shall set you free. One, two, three. We're gonna drive in every day, and somewhere along the way, there's a road sign with a story from the past. History is everywhere, and I'm gonna take you there. So buckle up tight, we're going there real fast. So take a ride down the history highway. We're headed right to the days of old. So take a ride down the history highway. I got the pedal to the metal and I'm really shaking home. It doesn't matter if you're a reenactor who loves the smell of black powder in the morning on the battlefield, or a collector who admires the craftsmanship of a well-made weapon of old. Dixie Gun Works has a Pedersoli just for you. And not only does Dixie Gun Works have a warehouse full of Pedersoli reproduction firearms, they have an incredible collection of antique firearms. Inside the pages of their huge catalog, you will find gun parts, shooting accessories, reenactor clothing, camping supplies, and even some big guns if you like to burn a lot of powder. Dixie Gun Works is located in Union City, Tennessee. But for your convenience, visit our online store at www.dixiegunworks.com or call 1-800-238-6785. This road trip on History Highway will be very different, in an ironic kind of way. I'm headed to southern Illinois to Gallatin County, near a township called Equality, which is located near the Saline River. The salt mines along the Saline River were owned by a slave master who lived in a house on Hickory Hill. This historical site was open to the public for many years, until recently, when the state of Illinois discontinued visitations, and this is the sign that greets you. When the subject of slavery enters into the conversation, most of the talk is about southern plantations. But what if I was to tell you that in the house on the hill behind the trees there lived one of the wealthiest slave operators in the state of Illinois, the land of Lincoln. In this segment, historian John Musgrave is going to tell us about John Hart Crenshaw, who operated a salt works near the Ohio River. And he used not only slaves, but indentured servants. Ironically, Crenshaw lived near the village of Equality. I met up with my good friend John Musgrave at the Saline Creek Pioneer Village and Museum in Harrisburg, Illinois. Often seen on the History Channel, John is a renowned historian who has dedicated much study on the subject of the Crenshaw Slave House. I could think of no better place to talk about history than on a porch where history was made, and with the man who knows his history. Like I promised earlier, John Musgrave has joined us, and he's going to tell us a little bit about John Hart Crenshaw. And if you would kind of take us back to the beginning when he first showed up in this neck of the woods, and then we'll advance from there.
Well, John's family, when he was a kid, were refugees from the New Madrid earthquake.
Wow.
They went back to Kentucky for a couple years, and then they showed up in the Illinois territory probably by 1815, 1816, give or take a year. By 1817, he had met one of his neighbors who he married, and then they started having kids.
Okay.
He went to work for the salt works. That was the major place of employment in the region.
Just as a straight employee?
Probably as a straight employee.
Okay.
We know he moved up fairly rapidly. White settlers didn't want to work there for long. It was a good place for a young man to make some money and then go put some money down on some land and move. We see a lot of people there 1 or 2 years, 1 or 2 seasons. With Crenshaw, he stayed there. Most of the workers were African American. They were either slaves or indentured servants. And indentured servants at that time was basically slavery with a term limit.
Right.
So technically they're free, they're just indentured for a certain length of time. The trouble is some of those lengths of time were 99 years back in the territorial days. So there were women who were indentured that would not have earned their freedom back until World War I,
well,
had they lived that long.
Right. Now, what was interesting about that, I believe, I remember our conversation earlier, of the state of Illinois in 1818, I believe. That's when, is that when the law passed, or the Constitution was changed for no slavery?
Illinois became a state in 1818.
Okay.
Our first Constitution had to be approved by Congress.
Gotcha.
So, because we're part of the Northwest Territory, we're supposed to be a free state. Granted, when Congress passed the Northwest Ordinance, there were already slaves here with the French, and they kind of forgot that part in the Treaty of Paris that guaranteed French residents their possessions.
Salt mines are very important. We can't forget.
Salt is a major preservative.
Yes.
It's needed. It's rare on the frontier, so they have to make it. And most springs aren't salt springs. This area had a major salt spring, and then Half Moon Lick area, which was like a large buffalo lick, deer lick. They dug numerous wells, even by the time Illinois became a state. And we have a map that shows which wells were salty, which wells were freshwater, and which wells were dry.
So here we have the gentleman coming into the area, into a very industrialized portion, which is for the salt mines, or the salt industry at the time. He gets involved. Although it's a free state, they have slaves here, indentured servants here, working that area, working in that industry of the salt works.
Yeah, because the line that says in our Constitution that says Illinois was a free state, the next 2 lines are exemptions to the rule, or exceptions to the rule. There's one for indentured servitude, which again is slavery on a term limit, which they did shorten under statehood as opposed to territorial laws. The other one was a clause that would allow slaves from Kentucky or elsewhere to be leased for up to 1 year to work at the salt works near Shawneetown. That is so vague that 3 counties over, when somebody's got a salt works closer to the Mississippi, they're still using that clause to justify slave labor at that salt works. One early settler 4 or 5 counties to the north wrote that just the excuse of rolling a barrel of salt into your cellar was enough to justify using slave labor.
Now here we are in a free state, and here we wind up this was a constitutional ruling, but they didn't really view it as being illegal, so they kind of found that little loophole.
It was unconstitutional because it violated the Constitution. It didn't necessarily violate a law because General Assembly had never gotten around
to putting that law
in the books. Now, decades later, when the Illinois Supreme Court is starting to chip away at the indentured servitude laws and the remnants of slavery, one of the things they do is say, hey, if you didn't actually file the paperwork on those indentures, on those kids, like Crenshaw did, they're not really legally indentured.
Now let's fast forward. Let's jump up to the period to where, let's get up, I guess, close to the 1850s, and there's been quite the change in the structure of the business. And now Crenshaw has gone from being an employee, worked his way up, and now he's like co-owner and getting ready to be almost a sole proprietor.
What he has done by the mid-20s, by about 1824, 25, there's something in the newspaper that tells us he is probably the manager for the people who actually have the leases, the largest lease, Guard Sozier and Company. Within a few years, he gets involved in kidnapping free blacks and settling them into slavery and that form of slave trading. And we see him take that revenue and put it back in the salt works. He's buying a sublease from one of the state leaseholders. Right. By the early 30s, when those leases are up, and they go from 5 leases to 3 leases to cover the salt works, he's one of the 3. In 1840, the whole lease system was supposed to end and the state sell off all of the remaining property. Well, at the last minute, the General Assembly passed a law that said, no, we're going to do it for another 10 years. Wow. And there's only going to be one leaseholder. Oh, and by the way, it's going to be John Hart Crenshaw. We're not even going to put it up for bids. And so that was passed without the locals in Gallatin County knowing about it.
Having a say.
Because they bring it up a few months later. One of the reasons why we think Lincoln was at the House, he was probably trying to garner support. Now, Lincoln voted against the bill, so that's good.
When we return, John will tell us how Crenshaw became so prosperous in the evil business of slave trade. From the pens of the Kennedy twins comes a new literary composition. The renowned authors of The South Was Right and a dozen more publications have become known for their zeal for conservatism and Southern heritage preservation. In their new book, Jefferson Davis, High Road to Emancipation and Constitutional Government, Donnie and Ron Kennedy hold nothing back. They're quick to point out Davis's high road approach to emancipation, while Lincoln chose the low road. Never afraid of controversy and to go against the grain of the politically correct, the Kennedy twins expose how our constitutional republic of sovereign states has been transformed into a deep state of federal government. To get your copy of the book that defends President Davis and the South, go to www.kennedytwins.com. That's www.kennedytwins.com.
Many years ago, Discovery Park of America was nothing more than a dream for Robert and Jenny Kirkland. Located in Union City, Tennessee, this world-class museum and learning center is second to none. It doesn't matter if you're a teacher planning a class trip, a parent looking for a vacation stop, or an individual who loves history and science, Discovery Park of America is the place for you. From days gone by to the future and beyond, there is something for everyone, no matter your age or point of interest. Since the year 2013, well over 1.3 million visitors have visited our 50-acre, $100 million facility. What used to be a peaceful cornfield in the countryside is now a state-of-the-art destination for you and your family. For more information, go to www.discoveryparkofamerica.com.
Hi, I'm Rick Revel, and I'm here today at the Jesse James Riding Stables, home of the Outlaw Cave, the hideout of Jesse James. Legend has it that Jesse and his gang hid out in this cave after robbing a stagecoach at Mammoth Cave. If you would like to visit his hideout and ride a horse over the trails where the Outlaws rode, come to the Jesse James Riding Stable at 3057 Mammoth Cave Road, Cave City, Kentucky. See you there. It is said the power of the pen is mightier than the sword. When it comes to recording history, that's an understated fact. The one who writes the history, they control the narrative. And in some cases, recorded history is rewritten for political reasons. In 1985, the Crenshaw House was placed on the National Register of Historical Places. In other words, it was under state and federal protection. In the early days, when it was open to the public, visitors could see how John Crenshaw turned his home into a prison for people of color. He had cells in his attic that would hold up to 8 people, and most of those were women and children. As political winds changed in 2008, the Crenshaw House became an embarrassment. The famous plantation home, known for its slave trade in a northern state, had to be dealt with immediately. So politicians had it shut down to the public. An archaeology team was even brought in to hopefully disprove that John Crenshaw was guilty of such evil deeds. The end results were inconclusive, and the guilty stains, they still linger. If it wasn't for the tireless research of John Musgrave, the Crenshaw House would fade away, and the politicians would win.
The old slave house, our Hickory Hill Plantation, which is what it would have been called back in Crenshaw's day, apparently is the last station on the reverse Underground Railroad still standing in the entire country.
Okay.
Now, there probably are some of those stations around, and some of them may still, people think they're an Underground Railroad station. Because a lot of times the folklore, they have blacks there prior to the Civil War, and they're being hidden upstairs in the attic. Oh, that's an Underground Railroad station. It's like, not necessarily. All along the border states, we have these kidnapping rings. If you watched 12 Years a Slave,
Right.
The main character, Solomon Northup, he is kidnapped by one of these criminal syndicates and is taken south and sold into slavery. And it takes him years to find the right people to help and plead his case until he can establish his freedom.
That's much what John Hart Crenshaw was involved in.
And a lot of the cases we know in this lower Ohio Valley side of southeastern Illinois, there are over 100 cases of kidnappings or attempted kidnappings that we can find. Crenshaw is associated with more than 60 of them.
Let's kind of bring it to a close now. What was the demise of John Hart Crenshaw? What kind of ended this long career of doing things kind of underhanded? What brought it to the end? And what was his death?
Part of it is that competition on the salt works in the salt industry kept chipping away at profits. In the late 40s, it looks like late 48 or early 49, he got into a fight with somebody they had captured. And according to stories and traditions, that guy probably got an axe and took a whack to Crenshaw's leg, which had to be amputated around just above the knee. So the one picture we have of Crenshaw, you can see that the leg is amputated. So that sets him back physically. And in fact, he moves out of the house in 49 over to Equality. Different people live there. What's interesting, the house is vacant in 1851 when a German immigrant family moves in. Mm-hmm. The daughter was interviewed in the 1930s. She said the house was vacant. She said the house was haunted because neighbors told them they were hearing strange noises coming from the 3rd floor. That is where the slaves, or in this case, what's most probably the kidnapped victims, were being held.
Makes sense.
And the county history, published about 3 decades later, says 1851 was the high point for kidnappings.
Now, you had a lot of this information you've been giving me today and sharing with me. That's some of it's in a book that you've written.
I did a book. I was a newspaper reporter covering the house when it closed 25 years ago. Then I got to join the research team the following week. It was amazing. This is a site that was open to tourists, to the public, for at least 70 years, based entirely on folklore. And the first solid proof that the stories were real, that Crenshaw actually was a kidnapper, wasn't found until 4 days later. And when I was calling Ron Nelson was that initial historian. When I was calling him, telling him that someone had given me the Equality Town minutes from that time period, and Charles Adams, Maria's wife, is actually some of the people that he's associated with. They're in that. He's telling me what he's found in the state archives. So I kind of get to join the research team, and that's how we started doing the research. And we did our first. We did our first. First publication that December in Springhouse Magazine. We had somebody in from the National Park Service who had done their Underground Railroad Network to Freedom program. You know, he told us then, if you can prove it, you've got one of the key sites in the country to interpret slavery, because this is slavery in the North, not the South. This is slavery in an industrial setting in the salt works, as opposed to picking cotton, which is the stereotype that we associate with slavery. It involves free blacks. There was not a huge free black community, but one of the largest in the state is there in Shawneetown and a couple other places here in the region. That these are people that date back to at least the 1820s, and they're free settlements, free people of color. Some of these families you can't even trace back to an enslaved ancestor. They're probably one of the first generations, maybe, of slaves that were brought over to Virginia as indentured servants. You have indentured servitude happening here in the Adams family and elsewhere, and it's like, which is a legal structure that had been around for centuries, that a lot of early Americans, their ancestors, including my namesake ancestor, came over as a 14-year-old indentured servant to a Quaker. Well, for 7 years, it must not have hurt him, because he ended up he had a farm. He was a member of the colonial legislature in Pennsylvania, so it didn't stop him from moving forward. Whereas you get people with 20, 30, 40-year indentures until their health breaks, basically, or some of those early ones that are 70, 90 years. You don't have that. The idea that this is reverse Underground Railroad as opposed to the actual Underground Railroad. We have real Underground Railroad in the area, not much of it. But it's interesting, but that's also because we have the free black community and we have religious groups, Emancipation Baptist, who are Baptist, but they're also anti-slavery. Friends to Humanity is what they call themselves. When you see a Methodist church and its name is Liberty, and there's a black settlement beside it, you know, that should be a clue that these people are friendly, and these people are acting as buffers in many ways. You find they're backed up to a swamp, and then there's a Quaker church on the other side. So it helps. But it's just a fascinating part of our history that is not well explored, because people don't know that even existed.
Now, if somebody wants to get a copy of your book, how would you go about getting a copy of your book?
You can get a copy of my book, Slave, Salt, Sex, and Mr. Crenshaw, at illinoishistory.com. And if you do illinoishistory.com/books, you'll get straight to that page. And that's me, so I autograph all those books. Or if you come up to Southern Illinois, you can find them in a number of stores.
Well, I appreciate you being on with us today and giving us this piece of history that has almost been lost. People like you keep saving our history. We appreciate Mr. John Musgrave. We've known each other actually about 20 plus years. We just haven't seen each other in nearly 20 plus years. It's been a while since we've had a chance to visit and talk, but we'll be right back on History Highway.
There is a place, nestled in the rolling farmland of southern Middle Tennessee. A home constructed in 1837, nearly lost to the ravages of war. Saved by a servant and a Confederate general. A place where families loved and lost. If walls could talk, what stories could be told? If a place, a home, can feel love, loss, pain, surely this is one of those places. Nearby is a more recent structure, and inside are the stories of heroes and heroines stories of battles won and lost, stories of sacrifices made by the people of its native soil. A place that will tell the true and complete story of the Southland and the war fought for its freedom. From the causes that led to the conflict to the modern-day struggles to protect Southern history. Historic Elm Springs and the Confederate Museum at Elm Springs are the general headquarters for the Sons of Confederate Veterans. A place where the story of the Southland and its historic struggle is preserved and told. Come and discover your history.
I'm sure you noticed this historical marker during my conversation with John Musgrave. Much like John Hart Crenshaw, Paddy Cannon would kidnap free people of color and fugitive slaves and sell them for a handsome profit. Living on the border of Delaware and Maryland, Paddy was part of the notorious Johnson Gang, who were known for their treachery in the slave trade. They were cutthroat murderers who roamed the land looking for victims and hoping to get rich from their underhanded ways. Mentally disturbed, Paddy Cannon took her profession to a whole new level. Once she got the taste of blood, she became a cold-blooded murderer, or what we know today as a serial killer. It didn't matter your age, from infants to adults. If she didn't like you, you could very well be her next victim. Convicted of her crimes in 1829, Paddy confessed to the murder of nearly 24 people of color. While waiting to be hung, Cannon dies in her cell in Georgetown, Delaware. Some say she died of natural causes, and others say she committed suicide. Without a doubt, Crenshaw and Cannon had much in common. They were both bad to the bone. On History Highway, we bring you the good and the bad alike. So join us again next time as we rediscover America 1 mile marker at a time.